All right, let me know if this has happened to you before. You hear a recording of a song and you think, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. I've got to play this on the harp. So you go find some sheet music, you print it out, you sit down at the harp with it and you try to play it. And it is just way too hard. It's like impossible. So you put the sheet music on the shelf and forget about it, and it just collects dust. If that all sounds familiar to you, I am here today to tell you that hope is not lost for that arrangement that you bought. You can still use it, you just need to know a couple of skills to make it easier so you can actually play it. Some people out there might say that this is cheating, but I am actually a huge fan of changing your sheet music to make it easier because, this is real life, and the point of making music is to actually play. So if there's too many notes on the page and it's too hard and that's stopping you from actually making music, then I think it's great to make it easier. And I actually do this all the time for weddings and gigs. If I need to learn a song and it's 9 pages long and really, really hard, and I'm not gonna have time to practice that every single time I have a wedding I need to play it at, so I might cut it down, make it shorter, make it easier so I can sight read. It's great, because at the end of the day, something does not need to be difficult in order for it to be beautiful. So all you really need to know are a few simple steps, and all of that sheet music you bought and put aside can actually be played. So today I'm going to show you an example of how to do this with my arrangement of a song called Always With Me from Spirited Away. I'm going to be showing this in a software called MuseScore. This is MuseScore version 3. Version 4 is currently available. I'm just using version 3 today because I like that I can use the tabs here to switch really quickly between 2 different versions. This is a free software that you can get from musescore.org, but it is only usable on desktop. It doesn't work on tablet or phone. When you're doing something like this for yourself, you can absolutely write things down in notation software, but you can also just cross things out on the page or make a copy of your music and white things out, or even just look at the page and play something other than what's written there. Now, the first thing you can do to make a song easier is just make it shorter. Genuinely, I think one of the things that can make a piece feel the hardest is just its length. For a beginner harpist, anything longer than maybe 2 or 3 pages can just feel really overwhelming. Sometimes even anything more than 1 page long might just feel like too much information. Our example piece here, Always With Me, is 4 pages long, so I'm going to shorten this, and in order to do that we want to look at what is the structure of the piece, what's important, what can we leave out, and where can we end the song that's still going to sound good. To figure this out, we want to look for patterns in the music. You can also listen to a recording to listen for what parts are the most important, and are there any parts that repeat. In particular, I want to look at the melody. So for our example song here, if I start by kind of looking right at the first place that the right hand comes in, I have this section that starts by going E, F, G, etc., etc. And that kind of keeps going until I get over here to about measure 20. Then there's a bunch of rests. So I think I can safely assume that from this 4th measure to the 20th measure over here, this is all one section. Then when I look at what comes after the rest, I have something different. So I have, this starts by going G, A, B, and then has something that looks quite different from what I had before. And again, this continues until over here, then I've got some rests. So at that point, I can kind of safely assume this is the end of this section. If I look at what comes next again, I've got E, F, G again. So this looks the same as what I had at the beginning. So this part is repeated. So if I want to make a piece shorter, I can just take out things that I've already heard before. So if I continue looking through, I can see this is my GAB section over here, seen that. And as I look through the rest of the piece, basically all of this melody is stuff that is repeating. We have like a little section here that's like slightly different, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. So I'm kind of good with those first 2 sections. Now I want to look at the ending. So right at the end of the piece here, I kind of have my little accompaniment pattern, and then there's a slight change in the last 2 bars. So what I can do is just cut from where my 2nd section ends over here, and I'm gonna just take from this bar all the way to just before they end, and I'm gonna delete that. And then once I've cut that out, I can see that my end of this 2nd section just leads right into the ending, so that's gonna sound good. And there we go. So we've got just the section A and section B, and then ending on our rolled chord here. Now that we've made it shorter, we can edit the notes that we have here to make it easier to play. And so what this actually comes down to is just taking notes out. The trick is knowing which ones to take out and which ones to leave. First thing to look at is the right hand. This one's usually a little bit easier to edit. This piece is pretty straightforward. We don't have any like ornaments or chords in it, but if you do have a piece that has that, you can just take them out. So just for example, if you had something that looked like this, there's some grace notes or some kind of ornament, that's something you could easily remove. You could just take out any of those grace notes and not play them. That's usually a very easy thing to remove. It's not going to affect your song a whole lot. Or if you have something where there's chords showing up a lot in the right hand, like these, you can just leave whatever note is at the top of the chord and remove anything that's underneath. So I could just, if these chords were here in the original song, I could take those out, and that's going to make it easier to play as well. When it comes to the left hand, the less notes there are, the easier it is to play. So when we're choosing which notes to keep and which notes to get rid of, we want to look for notes that fit into a triad pattern. So what a triad is are 3 notes that are stacked on top of each other like this, and they're all a skip apart or a third apart. If you were to play that on your harp, each of them would have a string in between them. So for example, E, B, and G is one. If I went lower, D, F, and A, C, E, and G. These are all examples of triads. So your left hand pattern is usually going to be made up of notes from a triad. There's obviously exceptions, but this is the majority of the music you're going to be playing. The left hand notes are coming from a triad. Now, obviously you can see even just from the left hand part right here, it's not always going to literally be the 3 notes stacked up on top of each other like this, but the idea of the triad is that it kind of is like the flavor of a particular measure. It gives it a particular sound. And even if the notes are not stacked on top of each other like this, if they're all present, it's still going to give that same flavor. So for example, if I were to just take these and stretch them out and I put the G up here, that's still this same kind of harmony. It's the same family of notes. So essentially we want to look at one measure in the left hand, look at what notes are there, and then figure out if we were to rearrange them from lowest to highest in a close position, would that make a triad? So for example, in our intro here, we've got E flat, B flat, and a G. If I were to rearrange those, and I'll just write them out here, if I go E flat, G, and B flat, that gives me a triad. If I look over here, I've got B, I've got F, and I've got a D. If I put that here, that gives me a triad. Once you know what you're dealing with, you've got a number of options to decide which note to take out, and we're gonna go from the hardest to the easiest. Hi, Editing Samantha here. I was just editing this and realized that I forgot to mention an important step. If you have notes in your left-hand part which are not members of the triad, so for example, in those bars where we had the E flat, the G, the B flat, if there were other notes that didn't fit into that group of 3, like say an F or a D or a C, those would be the first notes to go. So you want to keep the notes that belong to the triad first and foremost, get rid of stuff that's not belonging first, and then you can continue to pare down from there, which I will continue talking about now. In this case, I just want to have less notes, so these places where I have to play 2 note chords at the same time in the left hand, I don't want to do that. So for me, I'm going to take off the top note of each of these chords, and if you notice when I do that, this is a pattern you've probably seen before. It's kind of a 1-5-8 pattern, or like an octave with a 5th in the middle, all over the place in harp music. So we can just take these top notes off the chords here, and suddenly this is a lot easier to play. Or you can take a shape that we know and love, the broken triad. So essentially what we can do is, instead of just removing what's already here, we can kind of just rewrite these measures. If we figured out what the triad is, we can just write in something new that uses that triad in that measure. So for this measure here, I would go E, G, B, then my next one, I would go B, put that down an octave, D, F, and then I'm gonna go C, E, G, right? So I'm just taking my triad shape and literally making it a triad. Now, if this is still too hard, that's totally fair, because the more often you have to play notes in both hands, the harder it becomes. So if we can create some long notes in the left hand, that's going to make this a lot easier. So if I take these triads here, instead of playing them all broken, playing the notes separately, I can just play them all at once. I can go E, G, B as a dotted quarter note here, and that takes up the whole bar, and then I get a little bit of time to think about what my left hand has to do next. And if you want to go this route, you can roll these chords, you can play them solid, doesn't really matter, just whatever you're comfortable with. Now, if this is still too hard and you're having trouble finding these triads, that's totally okay as well. You don't have to do a triad. Take the middle note and just take it out. So now you just have the top note and the bottom note a fifth apart. That's great too. And if you're like, this is just still too hard, or you just want to make it easier, whatever, you can take out the top note as well, and then all you're left with is the bass note. And if you want to kind of do that really, really easily and quickly, just make something really easy, just take your bass note for every measure. Usually this is going to be the first note in every measure. Usually it's going to be the lowest note in the measure, and you can just be like, okay, I'm taking my bass note, and that's the whole bar. All right, I've gone ahead and cleaned up the rest of the arrangement. Doesn't this look easier than what we started with? This is where we started. Lots of notes, lots of pages, whew, and much simpler. So we've got kind of the option 1 up here, option 2 here, and then just bass notes and the rest of it. But you can see, even just looking at it, it's going to feel a lot less intimidating. Now, this is really just scratching the surface of all the options that are available to you to make your own arrangement that suits your needs and ability level. I actually made an entire course going right into detail and all the steps of how to make your own harp arrangements, and you don't need to know any music theory. So if that's something you'd like to go further with, definitely check out the link in the description. But I really hope this was helpful and you can get some more use out of your sheet music. So if you have a song you're going to try applying this to, let me know in the comments, and until next time, I'll see you later. Happy harping!